Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my absolute pleasure to have as my guest, Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. Sarah is a best-selling author, entrepreneur, and fierce advocate for self-worth and authentic leadership. She's best known as the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain, one of the top 1% most downloaded podcasts globally. But her journey to becoming a voice in the industry didn't come easily. There were many obstacles along the way, and I know we're going to be getting into those obstacles during our episode. So I will keep my audience in suspense just for now. But instead of staying silent, she decided to pick up a mic, and since then, she's built a powerful platform dedicated to amplifying voices that often go unheard, particularly women in underrepresented communities. Through her Women in Supply Chain series, Blended Podcast, and nonprofit Blended Pledge, Sarah continues to create safe spaces where vulnerability leads to real transformation. Now she's sharing her personal story in a brand new way through her debut memoir and #1 Amazon bestseller, and honestly, my favorite all-time title for any book, I Buried Her in a French Press. The book is a raw, honest reflection on identity, loss, and finding your voice after you've lost it. It's a story of self-worth, resilience, and learning that you are your best advocate. So whether she's on stage, behind the mic, or writing her truth, Sarah is committed to helping others feel seen, heard, and empowered to tell their own story unapologetically. And despite I love all of your bio, Sarah, but the unapologetically part I love, because too often we apologize for doing authentic displays of emotion, particularly during tough times. If I had a nickel for every time somebody cried over a loss that they had, whether it was a loss of a job, a loss of a loved one, and apologize for it, I could probably have my own island somewhere, because I don't think we should have to apologize for events that are traumatic, that are sad, and that reflects how we're genuinely feeling in the moment. So I like the unapologetically part.
Well, and as a Canadian, that is tough for me, right? Because we say sorry for everything.
Yes, I've understood that as a part of Canadian culture, but
Mhm.
we
Thank
got to
you for
get.
having me on the show, by the way. I'm super excited to be here. You and I had a intro call, just a little while ago, and I've been excited about this one ever since.
Well, me too, and we have to give a shout out to Portia Booker. Portia's that
Mhm.
master connector.
Yes, she is.
Yes, and she introduced us. We had a great pre-chat. I didn't scare you away after the pre-chat, so we find ourselves here doing a podcast, which is great. But yeah, you're right. We had a great conversation, and I've been excited about really having you on the program and talking to you about your journey, about your book, about your businesses, and how that's all shaped you. So I'm excited to get going.
Me too. And I love the title of your podcast too, The Teaching Journeys. Everything is a journey, right? I love that.
Yeah, and the other thing is we're all students and teachers, so let's learn from each other. So today
Right.
I am the student. You are going to be my teacher.
Uh,
So
Well, and that journey's already started because you started reading the book. So,
that's right. Yeah, and as I told you, before we recorded, I've gotten through half of the book, and I've already told you my favorite parts, but just the wisdoms and the aphorisms you come up with based on your own journey are just so relatable to everybody. And plus, I love the part about you being a ball girl for the Australian team during the Olympics. So it's still
well, hold
being
on. Correction. It wasn't the Olympics. It was the Canada Cup.
Canada.
I might have had to do that correction in the book, but
Okay. Well, hey, it's Canada's version to the Olympics. So
there you go. That's
we're
right. That's
and,
right.
and the fact that you're still beating guys' butts in softball, I said perfect. I said I knew we were going to have a great conversation just based on those two things. But I mentioned in your introduction that there are a lot of obstacles along the way for you to overcome
Mhm.
to get where you were. Would you care to tell our audience about some of the past experiences that have shaped who you are and what you do today?
We started the book in the introduction talking about an autoimmune disease that I have, which is called lipedema. It affects 11% of women, at least here in North America. And that was something that I had struggled with for quite a long time. Just to give everybody a visual, I had like a shelf on my ankle, and the fat doesn't travel through the body like it does normally for everybody else. And as I was getting older, it was getting worse. And I went to all sorts of specialists to find out what was going on. I went to a cardiologist that told me I should just, watch what I put in my mouth and I'd be a happy girl. Or a vein specialist who told me that if I just started running, because runners don't have fat legs, which was not the ideal solution because exercise actually doesn't necessarily help lipedema.
Mhm.
And so a lot of people, when they see somebody with lipedema, they think, oh, you just need to go exercise or watch what you eat. And that's actually furthest from the truth. Anyway, there's a story in there about how my lipedema correlates to Love Island, UK, and I'll leave that there so that people can go and read that in the book. That was one of the challenges. It took me about 15 years to figure out what that was. The other one was working in my family business. I had worked in the family business for about 20 years. And 10 days before my 37th birthday, we ended up having to close the doors for a variety of different reasons that I'm not going to go into because half of that is not my story. I lost everything, right? Like I wanted to take over that family business since I was 16. And that day I lost that dream. I lost my co host. I lost my team. I lost everything. And to take a step back from that, I had started the podcast in 2016 with a co-host, and it was a male co-host. And we had called it Two Babes Talk Supply Chain just to be funny and see how far we could push the industry. But that day I had lost everything. But I still had companies paying to come on the show. And so I had obligation. And that's kind of what helped get me up every morning to continue doing what I needed to do, even though I really didn't know where it was going to lead.
Mm.
Could not find a job to save my life. I ended up getting a part-time job as a receptionist at a tennis club about 10 months later, right? So it was a long period of time to go without a paycheck. And when we closed the company doors, I was director of sales and marketing. And now I'm a receptionist who has to mop floors 3 days a week. And so that was quite a transition. And so those are just a few of the stories that I share in the book. There's quite a few in there. I've been through quite a bit in my, lifetime so far. I'm 45 now and it's been a lot, but I'll pause there, Dave, just in case you have any questions.
Well, yeah, I got a couple of observations. One, the losses you experienced, they weren't necessarily losses related to death, but they were significant because,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, they were the loss of a dream, the loss of hopes for the future. I mean,
Hmm.
you had, I recall, is from your reading your story in your book, you were focused and you were poised to have a position to take over the family business at some point, and then that dream just disintegrated. The other thing that resonated with me is you kept moving.
I did.
You just kept moving. You didn't know what you were moving towards at the point, but you
Mhm.
just kept moving. And I'm going to kind of quote, I believe one of Canada's favorite sons, the late great Neil Peart, the drummer for
Okay.
Rush, who
Uh-huh.
had his own journey after tragic loss. But
Mm.
one of the wisdoms in one of my favorite books, Ghostwriter Travels on the Healing Road, is keep moving, something will come up. And
Mm.
when I was reading that part of your journey, especially when you got the job as a receptionist at a tennis club, I'm just looking at it, you just kept moving until something, you didn't know where it was going to lead, but you kept moving until something came up and eventually it did.
Yeah, and that actually is true, I think, for throughout most of my life. So at the time when we closed the doors, I actually had four other side hustles that I had been working on for a couple of years. So I had the podcast, I had a couple of other side hustles. I ended up taking two part-time jobs. And it was really just about like moving the pieces just a little bit every day. But that didn't take away from the fact that there were some afternoons that I spent crying on the couch. Like, I would spend a couple of hours in the morning working on something, and then I would like, the weight of everything that I was doing and the unknown of the future and what I had lost would come crashing down, and I would need a couple of hours to just sort of, grieve and go through it.
Mhm. And I think if we all did that, I think we would get through grief more smoothly because, in Western society, a show of any type of emotions for any period of
Mhm.
time that interferes with productivity and the bottom line is is frowned upon. But
Yeah.
I mean, you can't have joy without sadness. It's all part of who we are. And
Mhm.
but the fact is we grieve those tough moments and then we detach from it and we move on. But we honor it because it makes us who we are. Mm.
Well, and it's so interesting, and you just said something, and we posted something about my book the other day, and I wanted to say this because one of the chapters is you can carry strength and struggle at the same time.
Yes.
A lot of times we move through the journey of life thinking that it has to be either or one or the other. And I think what we're slowly beginning to realize, like now in today's society, is that two of those things or three of those things can exist at the same time. So, one example that I have is when the book was coming out. Actually, I can share this in two examples. When the book was coming out last October, I was terrified and excited all at the same time. And then I just recently launched my AI interactive podcast experience with Google Gemini. And the same thing happened. I was terrified and excited all at the same time. And it's interesting once we take a look at and really understand that those two types of emotions, even though they're on both sides, can interact at the exact same time. It's a lot more interesting in how we show up for ourselves on a daily basis, right? Because we're not caught up in one or the other. We know that they both exist. We know that we feel them both at almost the exact same times. And so, what does that mean for us? How do we take that emotion and motivate us to keep moving forward on a daily basis?
Exactly. And you also, I believe, said in your book is that acceptance and struggle can go hand in hand,
Yeah.
and that our struggles are a path to our superpowers.
Yes. And we might not like it, but we can accept it,
Yeah.
right? And I think sometimes we forget that,
Yeah.
right? Is that we are so focused on pushing back on that struggle rather than accepting it and understanding, what does that leave us with?
Mhm.
What does it leave us with? How did we move through that struggle? How did we come to accept it? What did we like about it? What do we not like about it?
Yeah.
What can we learn from it? And I know that's a really hard one, especially when, struggle is right here.
Mhm.
Really hard to sort of say, well, wait a second, what did I learn from it? But I also think that one of my favorite quotes is life is lived forward and understood backwards.
Yeah. I think that was Soren Kierkegaard.
Oh, was it?
I
I've
believe it
never
was.
known who actually said it.
I think it was Soren Kierkegaard that said that. That's one of my favorite quotes too.
Yeah, because I think it's true. You might not understand it in the moment,
Mhm.
but if you give it some time and you give it some space, so it's no longer here, it's a little bit here.
Yeah.
Then you can go back and take a look and see what you actually learned or who you ended up being or what your superpower was from it.
And I think you're right. When we're in it, we can't look at the greater value of the struggle because we're just trying to wallow our way through it. But
Mhm.
once we get through it and we come to a point of acceptance, for me, acceptance, and I don't know how what your definition of acceptance is. I'm going to throw out mine and then I'm going to have you respond to it. For me, acceptance in the context of anything is realizing that my life is going to be the way it is in spite of the absences of those people that I love or missed opportunities, but I'm going to accept it. I'm going to continue to re-engage in life or commit to re-engage in life and be of service to others in spite of what happened. A lot of
Mhm.
times people think, well, if you're accepting, you're doing closure, and that's not the case. Those are two
Mhm.
different things. I look in the context of grief and loss. There's closure to maybe the cause of death, but there's never closure to that life itself. That person is going to be a part of our world regardless of where they are. But acceptance is just realize, okay, this is my life the way it is. Is this something that I bargained for? Is this something that if I could change the script, I do it again? Maybe. But since this is my reality now, I'm going to make the best of it going forward and be of as much service as I can and leave the best tracks behind that I can leave behind.
Yeah, I don't think it's that you agree with it.
No.
right? Sometimes we think that acceptance is that you agree with it. You don't necessarily need to agree with it. And if tomorrow you don't accept it, but the next day you accept it, that's the journey.
Yep.
And that's what I talk about in the book around the power of being heard and your voice. Some days you're going to feel like you have your voice, and some days you're going to feel like you don't have your voice.
Mhm.
Some days you're going to feel like, yes, I can accept what's happened to me today. And maybe the next day you're going to be like, absolutely not. It still pisses me off.
Yeah.
I'm still going to ruminate about it. I want to have a pretend conversation with the other person.
Yeah.
Because I'm mad that they left, even though they're not here.
Yeah.
But that's what's going to make me feel better today. Doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily mean you have to continue doing that, and it's a perpetual cycle.
Absolutely.
But giving us the grace to ebb and flow throughout the days, throughout the week, throughout the month.
The ups and downs are a normal part of life. I mean, Debbie Ford, in her book, The Dark Side of the Light Chaser, said, we're the microcosm of the macrocosm. We contain every emotion, positive and negative,
Yeah.
that is known to humankind. And I'm paraphrasing this part, we become in service to each other when we authentically mirror those emotions, because you could like just be angry about something and you feel comfortable enough and vulnerable enough where you trust that I'm going to honor that emotion and not question it. But
Mhm.
then the question I need to ask is, how is Sarah's anger in service to me? What is it trying to teach me about myself? And if we suppress all of who we are, it does not facilitate genuine relationships.
Well, and
Mm,
suppression leads to blame,
yeah, absolutely.
right? We've
Yeah.
got to get out of the cycle of blaming. I think just blaming in general. I mean, I grew up in an industry that blamed each other. Like they
Yeah.
were all like this, right? I grew up in the supply chain industry where there's a lot of different entities that are involved in getting a product moved from here to here. And if something goes wrong, it was like, well, they didn't do this and they didn't do that and and it was this big blame game. And now that we've got some transparency, it still happens, but not as much. And so I think we do need to get out of the habit of perpetual blame
Yes.
and that being the thing that makes us feel better.
Mhm.
And then going back to what I said about carrying strength and struggle, I've been going through that for the last couple of months where, there are some days that I don't want to show up and be on camera. I don't feel like it. And I'm struggling. There's a few things that I've been struggling with over the last couple of months. And I put myself back in therapy. I've been in and out of therapy since the beginning of my 20s. And I recognized it, put myself back into therapy, but I've had the strength on the days that I need to have the strength while still struggling to show up on camera and show up to be who I am meant to be and for the impact that I want to make.
Yep.
And so that's just another example of how they can correlate at the same time, and how you give yourself grace. Maybe I have strength for the 2 hours that I need to be on camera,
Mhm.
and then I don't.
Yeah. And that's okay. Because
Yeah.
essentially what we're doing is we're embracing our own humanity. We're embracing being human.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I haven't been in therapy in a long time, but when things were kind of overwhelming for me, I was going through some transitions that, I could not deal with myself. If
Mm-hmm.
my support group that I had in place wasn't working, I'd find a therapist. And,
Yeah.
till I could get regrounded again and rebalanced. And I
Yeah.
think some of the best therapists I know have their own therapist. They still do.
Yeah, it's so true. And don't get me wrong, like I'm not struggling in every single area of my life.
Hmm.
But I recognize that in one area and it's bleeding a little bit into another with like the tone and the way that I'm speaking to people and things like that. And that's where I'm like, well, wait a second. Now it's my responsibility. I need to make sure that I do what I have to do so that I can get back and be grounded, like you
Yeah.
said.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing, I think if we can recognize that we are going to have, that our limitations are going to come up, that we need, and if that can empower us with the
Mhm.
support to find our voice to talk about those limitations.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I think, we can become disempowered and by not share our voice because we think we don't have anything of value to offer. Somebody's going to look at our problems and say, well, it's not that big of a deal. Well, if it's a problem for you, it's a problem that becomes significant for me if I'm your therapist or if I'm your coach, then that becomes significant for me.
Yeah. So true. So
So
true.
I love the title of your book. I buried her in a French press. I laughed when I saw that. I think for this podcast, I'm going to have to try to find some B-roll with a French press for this part of the.
Hold on. I have one right here. So I have a
Oh,
French press right here. And then I have the book that's got a French press right here.
oh, perfect. That's perfect. So tell us how you came up with the title.
Well, the story is actually in the book. You've only read half, so I don't think you've gotten there yet because I think it's chapter 9. I originally thought it was 11, but I think it's chapter 9. And it's really interesting because a lot of people think it's like an anecdote for
Yeah.
the book, and it's absolutely not. It's actually a real life story of resilience in a very emotionally charged moment. And I ended up burying my step-grandmother in a French press for a variety of different reasons, and you'll learn those reasons through the story. And so there's a couple of reasons why I named it that. One was an ode to my step-grandmother. She was like my best friend, one of my best friends. The second part was that this story was really important to share because it was an emotionally charged day. It was the day that we were going to go and bury my grandparents. And it was something that I had to do long distance because I had to make all the arrangements for the burial. It was during COVID, and so I had to quarantine for 5 days when I got to England. And so there was a series of events that happened leading up to this moment. And it being that emotionally charged day makes a lot of difference when you're in the moment and having to make really hard decisions that are going to
Mhm,
affect a lot of people,
mhm.
and how trusting your gut can lead you to the right place.
What is your take on intuition in terms of how can that help us co-create the reality of our dreams? It actually, how can it help us find our voice?
Mm.
And why don't we trust our intuition more?
So that's a hard one for me because I am fairly intuitive and I have been most of my life, and I really haven't understood it. And I also haven't taken the time to understand it. I think as I get older, it keeps coming up that I do need to put in some work to really harness it and really understand it. It's the moments like when I was in that kitchen and her ashes were in a plastic bag in a white paper box. And I had 20 minutes to get to the burial where my whole family was waiting. It's moments like those where I understand more how my intuition in that moment led me to something impactful that I actually didn't even understand that day, right? Like it led me to the family actually coming together, and it led me to realizing that my grandmother loved coffee, so it made sense, right? Which I didn't know in that moment. I had the choice between a water canteen and a French press to bury her in. And like I said, most of the stories in the book, so go read it. But and then it led to me, writing the book, sharing the book, creating a title out of it that people resonate with, that creates a little bit of mystery around it. Like, what does that actually mean? What does that got to do with finding your voice? And it's led to the impact that I've
Mhm,
been able to write this book and have it resonate with so many people.
mhm.
I wrote it hoping that I was going to help one person.
Well, and I think I buried her in a French press has more appeal than I buried her in a water canteen.
I mean, I wasn't really weighing those options at the time. And actually, it's when you talk about intuition, and I'm going to give away this part of the story. Her niece had gutted the house down
Mhm,
to the studs. Like there wasn't even a carpet in that place when I got there. And there was one cupboard. I started opening up cupboards frantically because I didn't have time to stop and get an urn or do anything like that. There was one cupboard completely untouched. And this French press was in a box that was never opened with a receipt from 1992. Still in the plastic, still in the box, never touched. So when we talk about intuition and going with our gut, when we talk
mhm.
about a moment of resilience, I could have
Yeah.
crumbled in that moment and been like, well, there's nothing left in this house. Why am I even bothering looking? But it took that
Mhm.
intuition, that moment of just going, well, wait a second, why don't we try? And I was like, I'm gonna try with the cupboards, and then I'm gonna go to the shed.
Mhm.
I'm like, there's gotta be something in there. There's no way she touched the shed.
It's like we follow our intuition at the time. We don't know why we're actually doing it, or we don't know
Mhm.
the immediate concrete here and now results of our intuition, but we only find out after that.
Right.
You found out that she loved coffee.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I knew that she loved coffee. I drank coffee with her all the time.
yeah,
But in the moment, I didn't think about that.
yeah. You were just thinking, what are we gonna bury my step grandmother's ashes in? And that's what
Yeah.
you were thinking of. What could we could find that's going to be suitable for her to be buried in rather than a box in a plastic bag, it's
Yeah.
just and you did, and your intuition served you well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think a lot of people don't follow their intuition because it's like it isn't evidence based. People will say, well,
True.
you gotta have evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not necessarily. My intuition has saved me in situations, Sarah, where I was in therapeutic situations where if I went by the book, it would have been catastrophic for me and the patients that I was responsible for overseeing. And at the time, if you asked me why I did what I did, I couldn't tell you, but all I know is it worked.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was able to sit back and process it later and say, yeah, now this is why I did this. I did it without thinking. But
Yeah.
after I had a chance to think about it, I was able to put the pieces together. But, sometimes you got to go with your gut and just trust it.
Yeah. So true.
There's a couple of things in your book that I just wanted to throw out and have your reaction to it. And the first thing that kind of comes to your mind when I say this, whatever we hide, we fail to understand, much less value.
What is the first thing that comes to my mind? There's so much that we hide. There's so
Yeah.
much that we hide that can really help us. A lot of times we're so scared of that. But why are we scared of it? It's going to make us vulnerable. We don't know what other people are going to say about it or about us when they find out. But what does it say about us first? Why do we first go to what everybody else is going to think about it?
Yeah.
Why don't we start with, well, what do I think about it?
Mhm.
What does it say about me to me before
Mhm.
we even talk about You don't have to talk about it. You can hide it and work on it yourself.
Mhm.
You don't have to put it out in public. You don't have to tell anybody about it.
Mhm.
But
You
what
could
are we
even,
scared of?
what are we scared of? What are we afraid is going to happen? What's the worst thing that's going to happen if we reveal the parts of us that we want to stay hidden?
Yeah.
And I could think the worst thing that could happen is that we die revealing it. And I don't think anybody's ever died from being vulnerable, Sarah. Let's put it that way.
I think you are right. I mean, there are certain situations, especially with, let's say, LGBTQIA plus community,
Yes.
where there are situations like that when you are vulnerable that it might not be a certain situation to be able to be safe to say
Yes.
that. And
Yep.
so I think we do have to be mindful of that because there is non-safe spaces to be vulnerable and that it could end up in danger.
Mhm.
But for the most part, I think if we start with ourselves and what we are hiding and what we can learn from it, rather than putting ourselves out there necessarily vulnerably, then I think there's a lot that we can do. And I think part of that too is understanding who is in our circle, who are the people that we could potentially talk about those things with,
Mhm.
rather than just talking about it with everybody, or not just
Mhm.
everybody, but maybe they're the wrong people.
Mhm.
So taking a moment and, sort of self-assessing who you've got in your circle and who you can talk to about certain things once you're ready is
Absolutely.
important.
Yes, absolutely. You made a great point about the LGBTQ community. You don't want to out somebody's sexual preference or what sex they're aligned with. That has to
Mm.
be a choice that they make on their own terms
Yeah.
and, when they feel the time is right. And you're right. There's got to be discretion with that as well, too, in terms of
Yeah.
not forcing that to happen or pushing that to happen before that person's actually ready to do it and to be vulnerable.
Yeah. And the reason why that came up for me today is I just recently, 2 days ago, recorded a podcast episode for Blended about intersectionality.
Mhm.
And that was one of the things that came up when we were talking about identity, right? Can we ask you how you identify?
Mhm.
And everybody said yes, but. And it wasn't a but around, the room that you were in or anything like that. It was a but around it depends who I'm with as to what I'm going to share
Yes.
and how safe I feel. And then
Yes.
we all have that choice. And
Mm.
we all make wrong decisions
Mhm.
by confiding and talking to wrong people. Happens to the best of us. But that's also how we learn and grow.
And I think you're right. We need to be able to be mindful of those communities and people we think are going to support us being vulnerable, are
Mhm.
going to, you know, provide feedback, provide warmth, provide acceptance,
Yeah.
and, tell individuals, I suggest individuals, there's a community you don't feel comfortable with, trust your gut, find a
Yeah.
community that's going to align with your message and align with you.
Yeah, or only share what you feel comfortable sharing in that environment.
Mhm.
We don't have to share everything about ourselves for people to know and love us.
You're right. And there's a concept in therapy called let your client find their emotional comfort zone. And these are
Mm.
particularly with clients, let's say, have had a history of abuse or basically have had any type of issue with authority where
Mhm.
they have had ambiguous relationships with authority. You allow them to build up trust realistically and gradually. They share more as they feel comfortable with you. I've had clients tell me, Dave, this is as far as I want to go with my abuse history. I don't feel comfortable right now. So instead of pushing, I say, fine, let's, we'll stop there and we can revisit that when you're ready. Because, if we're going to build ongoing relationships, we can't force a person to do something they're not ready to do. We have to give them that space to do that. And that
Mhm.
empowers them to sit quiet and decide how they're best going to reflect their own reality in their own words. And I think it also helps them find their voice in that way too.
Yeah,
When
love that.
when you cut them some slack. So,
Well, and we also have to cut ourselves some slack too.
mhm,
Because in that moment, a lot of times we beat ourselves up and we're like, oh, we should be sharing this and sharing that. And oh, why can't I do that?
yeah,
And I do that all the time. I'm sure you do it too.
I listen. I said, well, should I have done this? Should I have done this? And then I figure, well, I got to stop shitting on myself. So
Exactly.
I just stopped.
Shitting.
What shitting on myself? Yeah,
I love that. Shitting on yourself. Let's stop
yeah,
shitting on ourselves,
yeah.
people.
We're just shitting on ourselves today. So, but as far as the human experience, we all do that.
Mhm.
And I think if we weren't as passionate and as caring and as about what we do, we wouldn't question it.
Yeah, it's fair. Hmm.
I think we wouldn't question it. So. Here's another one that I found that I loved and I wanted to get your take on it.
Hmm.
Not feeling good about ourselves can lead to self-sabotage.
Yes, it absolutely can. I want to use a job interview as an example. How many times have we gotten a job interview of something that maybe we really, really wanted, but then we only show up halfway?
Yeah.
We're not in the environment that we need to be. We're not dressed appropriately. We haven't prepared or given ourselves enough time to get ready for the call, do some research, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe get to understand a little bit more about how we want to show up for that call or that interview or whatever that looks like. We've all done it.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not feeling good about ourselves on that day or whatever that looks like, we sometimes cut corners
Yep.
and we lose out on the opportunities that we know that we are worthy of,
Mm-hmm.
but that day we might not feel so worthy.
Absolutely. And I think we could self-sabotage when we are feeling good about ourselves.
Oh, yeah. Self sabotage can happen all the time.
Yep.
But I feel like self sabotage happens more and it tells us more about how we feel about ourselves,
Yep.
to be honest. If you are paying attention and you're aware as to when that shows up for you and how that happens, you'll actually learn so much more about how you feel about your self worth.
And if I can, I'll share one quick story with you in terms of one of the
Yeah.
more I think, as I look back on it now, humorous self-sabotage stories I can tell you. And I say humorous, obviously with the, in quotations, but I was working, one of the first clients I ever worked with was a 36-year-old woman, had a history of real low self-esteem, domestic violence, physical abuse as a child, sexual abuse. brilliant woman, great personality, but her self-esteem was like right in the toilet.
Yeah.
So she was doing some really, really good work in treatment, and she was starting to feel good about herself. Now, I was back where I was working, we had the staff lounge. And for those of you who were around in the 70s and 80s, you probably remember those little rotisseries where you could stick hot dogs on a skewer. So I'm sitting there making
You
my
had
dinner.
one of them?
Yeah, I had one of them.
We only got donuts or bagels on a Friday.
Hey, listen, I had to bring in my own hot dogs. The state was too cheap to supply food for us, so I had to bring in the hot dogs. But they did provide the rotisserie, so I was happy with that. So I'm sitting there watching my hot dogs brown. And when this young woman was in crisis, Sarah, she had no boundaries. She would have to talk immediately. So she burst into the staff lounge just as I'm trying to eat my
Hot dog.
succulent hot dogs. And I say succulent sarcastically. I'm glad she saved me from that. She sits down in a chair, puts her head down on the table, starts crying, looks at me. She goes, Dave, I'm feeling good. What's wrong with me?
Mm.
And I looked at, and we had to sit down and we had to normalize that. Yeah, I mean, because her identity was her self-esteem. Bad was good, and she couldn't
Mhm.
understand how good was good. That this contradicted all the messages that she had. So
Yeah.
after some validation, and after some talk about, yeah, it's normal that you would feel this way, but stay the course. You're doing a great job. You got a lot of support from me and everybody else here. She was fine, but she questioned it because she was feeling so good. But she questioned it. That's why she was feeling so good, because she was feeling bad about herself in the first place.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of people can resonate with that. I'll go to a conference and, lots of great things happen. There's a lot of movement. We're doing so many things. We're talking to so many people. And then you come back from it and it's like,
Well,
and then it's not necessarily a self-sabotage, but it's you sort of lose that momentum around, meeting lots of people and go, 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 go. And then all of a sudden you're at home and it's like, "Rrr, I feel bad about myself again."
yeah, yeah,
And I think
yep.
that's the human experience, right? We
hmm
have a lot of highs. We breeze by them because we don't actually necessarily take them in and be present with them.
hmm
And then once that high is gone, we're left to pick up those pieces,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. And with the human experience, we're supposed to experience everything, the yin and the
Yeah.
yang of it. It's just not all the happy stuff. And
Yeah.
I don't hang around with happy people, sir. The people that I don't hang around with people who are just continually happy all the time.
I mean, that's fair because that could get
Yeah.
really annoying, not gonna
Yeah.
lie. Well,
Oh yeah. How's your day? Best day ever. Every day I could ask them that same question. I mean, the roof could be caving in. They could, and I ask, how you doing today? Best day ever. Is the roof's falling in behind them? And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, no, that's just denying the other parts of yourself that make you who you are. And
yes, and it's inauthentic.
it is. I mean, I've never been happy 24/7. I don't even think there's a pharmaceutical, legal or illegal, that could make me happy
Right.
24/7.
Mhm.
But the thing is that if I asked you a question, Sarah,
Mhm.
how's said, Dave, today sucks. Great. We can have a conversation because I know
Yeah.
that this is authentic. So I could sit with your suckiness and
But
we could have a conversation about it.
yeah, but also it invites that conversation.
Yeah,
If everything's good all the time, you've got nothing to really ask about. I mean,
that's
I
right.
guess you could say, "Okay, what's so good about it?"
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody says, "My day sucks," okay, well, tell me about it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's live through this together so that you
That's
don't feel alone.
yeah. And the people I have in my support circle, they have happy moments. I have happy moments.
Mhm.
But there's also other moments that aren't so happy. And those
Right.
individuals in my support circle, have not so happy moments. But we can be there for each other's happy moments and our unhappy moments.
Yeah.
And we're still friends in the process because we understand that's part of our emergence and development as genuine human beings.
Right. Mhm. So true.
So I want to talk about your podcast for a minute, Blended,
Sure.
and Let's Talk Supply Chain. Tell us about the podcast, how they align with the work that you're already doing, specifically how they align with your core values.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great question. So let's talk supply chain is obviously about supply chain. So we get individuals, thought leaders, experts in supply chain coming on the show. But one of the most important things that we do on the show is we highlight vendors in the community and like what they're doing, because technology is really driving supply chain. And if I were to put supply chain into context for you, in case you don't know what it is, it's sourcing, it's buying the product, it's manufacturing the product, it's moving the product, warehousing the product, and then delivering the product to your door. And so there's a lot of moving pieces, and technology is really helping to drive the innovation to help create efficiencies. And so there's a lot of different options out there. And so it can be extremely overwhelming. There's all sorts of news that's happening in supply chain. There's all sorts of, technologies and all sorts of stuff. And so our podcast really brings all of that together. Somebody said the other day that supply chains are like 6 degrees or 6 decisions away from global shutdown.
Mm-hmm.
And so the decisions that the supply chain leaders and professionals and organizations are making on a daily basis in supply chain is actually super important to everybody's everyday life,
Mm-hmm.
because we provide medication, food, and those are key things that everybody needs to do to live every single day. So supply chains are very vital. And so that's what that podcast is about. I've spent, my whole career in that industry, and it's really great. And then I started the Woman in Supply Chain series in 2018, and I have a very blended family. And we were talking about lots of different topics within our family, especially as we were going into COVID and shut down and all that kind of stuff. And I realized that I wanted to talk about inclusion more than just gender. It is more than gender, and I wanted to give life to that. And so I started the Blended podcast in October 2021. And I bring 5 different people together from different walks of life to talk about inclusion in the workplace. And it's honestly, I'm the host, but I don't even say my name, I think, at the beginning of the episode, because the episodes are really about the guests, right? They're about the conversation. They're not about me, and I don't know everything. And so magic really happens on this episode, because most of them have never met each other and most of them have never met me. And we spend 2 hours or an hour and a half talking about really, really hard topics. And so that really extended my advocacy work. And then a year later, we started the Blended Pledge, which is our nonprofit. And we give away grants to cover travel expenses so that diverse voices can say yes to speaking engagements. But you might be wondering, like, what's the common theme? Well, the common theme is around creating safe space for conversation. That is my superpower, and that's how I help people feel seen and heard. It doesn't matter what topic we're talking about. We could talk about supply chain, we could talk about privilege, we could talk about, all sorts of things. And it's about creating safe space for that conversation. And our nonprofit and giving away the grants, giving people the opportunity to be on stage, is another way of creating safe space for conversation. And so that's how it all aligns.
Yeah, and I think that's been an ongoing theme, at least from a lot of individuals I've talked to in the business world and coaches, is about creating safe spaces for growth to occur, for individuals to, to be able to work together productively and also to find their own voices within that organization. I want to backtrack with supply chain. You mentioned about those 6 decisions. And me being a neophyte, and as far as new to supply chain stuff, is the implementation process really important to look at those questions and say, okay, what do we need to do to ensure that there isn't any breakdown in that system of supply chain, or is it something else?
No, that is a very, very important conversation. What happens though is that the needle is moving on a daily basis,
Okay.
right? Depending on the disruption. So if you think about tariffs, that was a really big disruption for our industry because we had to update systems. We had to update cost structure. We had to figure out whether you're going to pass along the cost of it or not, and whether your customer will take it or not. We had to figure out if manufacturing in those places that have the high tariffs was worth it, or how fast could we move it to somewhere else, right? So when we think about the decisions that are happening with every disruption that's happening, that's only one disruption. We're talking about disruptions, probably 2 or 3 that are happening on a daily basis. It's very overwhelming. It's very consuming. It's actually very exhausting.
Yeah, and particularly when you have to adjust on the fly and you try to make incremental improvements when you can, but because that tariffs are so disruptive that it's just
Yeah.
like, those changes may not be able to be incremental. They may have to be like stopgaps until,
Yeah.
and it's really, I think, tough for business owners. I think business people or anybody to work under those changing, unpredictable conditions day by day. It's got to
Yeah.
be tough.
Yeah. It really is. I mean, from a logistics standpoint, making a decision on getting it on one vessel versus another, that could result in $10,000 a day if a line is shut down.
Yeah.
Like these are real decisions
Mhm.
that cost money and also save lives.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
One of the things I know this is gonna kind of sound right off the beaten path, but I have a degree in psychology, and one of the bachelor's of psychology. One of the things I kind of learned is to be a trained observer. So
Okay.
I'm going to talk to you about your shirt.
Yes.
Um,
And
pro-
it's a chapter in my book, by the way.
yeah, yes, I got progress over perfection. I also think that's related to your monthly newsletter that you have on
It is.
LinkedIn.
Mhm.
So talk about your shirt. Talk about progress over perfection. Why that is so meaningful for you, and why we should take that as part of our own everyday philosophy.
Well, earlier you talked about the fact that I kept moving, right?
Yep.
One of the examples that I'll share when I first went out on my own for the podcast, they were some of the worst audio because I had lost my team, I had lost my co-host, so I actually had autonomy to figure it out. And so I figured it out and I tried different platforms and the audio was really bad, but I put it out anyways. And it's actually one of my most listened to episodes. Some of the episodes with the worst audio are the most listened to episodes. And I repeat that because that's what progress over perfection looks like. If I had waited and had to redo those episodes and not put them out until they were perfect, I can't guarantee that they would have been out in a month, 2 months, 6 months, 12 months
Yeah.
if I had waited, right? I mean,
Hmm.
now we have a team of 18 people. Like, we're doing all sorts of things within the content realm and supply chain. And it's all because I just kept putting it out there. Like when LinkedIn first announced that you could go live, I remember sitting there, I pressed the live button and I was like, so I have no idea what I'm doing today, but I'm testing out the LinkedIn live feature to see what I want to do. I didn't have a script. And people were coming in on the comments and they were saying hi or whatever. And so I started just saying hi to them. Thanks for coming. Hey. And somebody messaged me and they were like, well, you need to do a little bit more than sit there and say hi to people. Then next time I'll figure it out. And so it's just a matter of getting out of your own way because sometimes perfection, if we wait on perfection, you're actually never going to do anything because it'll never be perfect. And actually, another example is anything that I record, like I'm a guest on or I'm a host on or whatever, I do not watch. I do not watch. I don't listen to. I've been a guest on other people's show and they're like, we'll send it to you so you can listen to it and make sure it's good. I'm like, absolutely not. Do not send it to me. Just put it out there. Because it
Yeah.
is who it is. I am who I am.
Hmm.
If you've got feedback for me, bring it. And I'll
Yeah.
consider it, but it's already done.
Yeah. And yeah, feedback is only good if it's welcomed. You never force feedback
Fair.
on somebody else. But the other thing is for me when I started doing podcasts, I used to hate my voice on tape. I could never listen to anything. I never liked my voice on tape. Whatever reason, I thought I sounded really crappy on tape.
Mhm.
But having to edit my own podcast forced me to listen to my own voice. I can't, that's not really that bad. I was able to get used to it, but I never listen to my own podcast.
Mhm.
I just don't do it. It's like edit it the way you need to edit it. It's going to be out there in the form it's meant to be out there. I don't need to listen to it.
Yeah.
Just put it out there and hopefully you get a lot of traffic with it. Hopefully the conversation has an impact.
Yeah. I have another example actually for the blended episode. Remember how I said I have 5 people
Yeah.
per episode? Well, a lot of people, because they're really heavy topics, they get in their head. So they either don't show up on the day or they reach out to me the day before and they go, something's come up, can't come. And I used to get really upset about it because I was like, I need 5 people. And oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And then I started thinking about it. I'm like, no, wait a second. Whoever is meant to be here for this conversation, as long as I've got 2 people and me, right? Because I need some different perspectives. As long as I've got 2 people, whoever is meant to be on this episode will show up for that day.
Yep. Yeah. And it also reminds me of one of Don Miguel Ruiz's 4 agreements is don't take
Yeah.
everything personally.
I just read the 5th agreement. Have you read it?
Not yet.
Highly recommend.
All right. I
It's
definitely will check it out. Once I get past
Mine.
the end of the semester, yeah. Once I get past your book, that's next time I got to finish your book. Because if I don't, I know both you and Portia are going to be on me until I do. So, but yeah, I plan on finishing it. Trust me. So, well, this has been so much fun. I could probably go for another 2 hours with you, but I know you probably got some things you need to take care of today. So, I got to have a couple more questions for you. The first, you've left our audience with so much good stuff today, so much wisdom, so much of yourself and your authentic personality with us. But I'm going to ask you to dig in to the reservoir one more time.
Okay.
Give our audience the one ultimate takeaway for today from you.
Be yourself. Be yourself. It's too exhausting to be something that you're not. And give yourself some grace on a day-to-day basis. And then obviously progress over perfection.
Absolutely. I had a friend of mine that he comes in and speaks to my death, dying, and bereavement class. He says, being yourself is sometimes the hardest thing that you'll ever have to do.
Yeah. Because you have to figure out what that is first.
Mm-hmm. And I think you have to shut out the external noise of everybody else who thinks this is who you should be, as opposed to who you
Yes.
want to be.
And also the labels, the identities and the labels that you think that you're adhering to, you're actually giving your power away to.
Yep.
Stop doing that. We've got to
Yeah.
stop doing that.
Yeah. You know, and I ask my students, how would you like me to be totally responsible for you?
Mhm.
You just say, here, Dave, make out my schedule for the next 4 years. And I put you into any class that you want and not consider your input. Would you like that? Each
Right.
one of them shakes their head. I tell them, so think about that the next time you feel like you need to give your power away to somebody else. Think about what we just talked about.
Somebody else or a label or an
Yeah.
identity. Somebody said this to me the other day, and they were, because usually you say treat everyone how you would like to be treated,
Mm-hmm.
but that's actually wrong. It's treat everybody how they would like to be treated.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Anyway.
It makes sense. Well, especially if how we see ourselves isn't so positive, we don't want to treat the other person the way we see ourselves.
Fair point.
You
Fair
know,
point.
you know, we says, how would they want to be treated? And they
Yeah.
would want to be treated as if they had a voice, as if they had something to offer. And that helps us develop empathy.
It helps us develop empathy, but then I think it also helps us look at ourselves too.
Mm-hmm.
Is this how I would want to treat somebody else?
Yeah.
And if it's not, then why are we treating ourselves that way?
Exactly. You know, and that's something that we need to sit in the quiet and take a deep dive into what is contributing to me seeing myself as less than. Why do I
Yeah.
treat people better than
Mhm.
how I see myself? So my last question, people want to get in touch with you, contract with you about your services, purchase your book, follow your podcast. What's the best way for them to do that, Sarah?
So many ways, Dave. Are you ready?
I'm waiting with bated breath.
So if they go on Amazon, the only thing that comes up when you type in "I buried her in a French press" is my book. So there you go. You're welcome. Just kidding. And then follow me on Instagram, Sarah Barnes Humphrey. We've got blended_pledge. We've got Let's Talk Supply Chain on Instagram. Same thing on LinkedIn, Sarah Barnes Humphrey, Let's Talk Supply Chain, blended pledge. And then I've got my own personal website, which is sarahbarneshumphrey.com. And that's where we're actually going to be sharing some training documents soon. We're going to be sharing a checklist for book clubs. If anybody out there has a book club, we'd love for you to, share the book and share the checklist that we're going to be putting together around the book. So, yeah.
Cool. And all of that information will get in the episode notes or, when our podcast goes live. So with that, Sarah, thank you so much for just a wonderful conversation today. Truly enjoyed this. I hope we can do it again sometime.
Thank you so much for sharing your space with me, Dave. I really, really appreciate being on the show.
You're welcome. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.